Value, monetary value, is at the heart of the commercial or market sectors of our economy. Nothing gets bought and sold unless the parties understand its value and unless they can agree on a price that reflects those understandings. So value is fundamental to our economy, but value, despite being so fundamental, is one of the most poorly understood concepts in economics and indeed in political economy. Mainstream economists think that value is just the same thing as price, determined by the intersection of demand and supply curves. But value is one of the key determinants of price, and those economists rarely look beyond their imaginary curves to consider what determines value itself. Their Marxist critics, on the other hand, think that value is purely a product of labour, something that is magically embedded in commodities when they're produced and somehow influences what happens later when they're bought and sold. Both of those groups of thinkers are wrong. Value is both more familiar and more complicated than either of those theories suggests. Value, and here's the familiar thing, is what we think something is worth. But, and here's the more complicated thing, although we each form our own view of what something is worth, we do that under the influence of a whole host of what I call lay theories of value, or value conventions, that we absorb from our social environment. So to make sense of something's value, we need to understand which theories of value the parties concerned are applying to it, how they apply them, and why they are using those particular theories rather than others. Once we start to look into that last question, we then come across a huge infrastructure that is dedicated to persuading us to apply particular theories of value to particular kinds of things. That infrastructure includes advertising and marketing, but also more subtle influences such as those that shape the connections we make between particular social identities and particular kinds of consumption choices. You might think that valuation would be more objective when people ascribe value to financial assets. The orthodox theory is that a financial asset gives its owner a stream of future income, and to determine the value of the asset, all we need to do is to discount that stream of income by a rate of interest. That theory, though, tells us nothing about the main factor that determines the value of the asset, which is what future income stream we should actually expect from it. How do people estimate those income streams? Once again, they apply theories or conventions. And once again, to make sense of financial asset values, we need to understand which theories are applied and why it is those theories rather than others. Once again, there's a vast infrastructure dedicated to constructing and supporting lay theories of financial value, and the purveyors of financial assets devote enormous amounts of work to developing and advancing those theories. My book, Inventing Value, lays out this argument in detail and then applies it to three case studies, three types of financial assets, to show how self-interested actors shape the ways in which we value them. It looks at how venture capitalists construct valuations for the companies that they invest in and then sell on, often by launching them onto the stock market. It looks at the superficially very different case of Bitcoin and how a group of financial outsiders constructed not only Bitcoin itself, but also a series of valuation conventions that have led people to ascribe value to it. And it looks at the structured subprime securities that brought about the 2008 financial crisis and how the investment banks inflated their apparent value. Now, despite the differences between these cases, in each of them, a set of what I call value entrepreneurs constructed conventions and narratives of financial value and used them to build circles of investors who were willing to buy the assets concerned and to value them using these conventions. This kind of approach is useful, I think, this kind of approach to value, because it illuminates some of the forces that shape how our economy operates, forces that tend to be ignored by the prevailing approaches. But it's also important because it helps us to see how tenuous the valuations are that our contemporary economic system is built on. Financial valuations in particular are a house of cards constructed by finance sector actors who use their power to shape the stories that persuade potential investors of financial asset values. And if, as this suggests, financial asset values are a means for finance sector actors to profit at the expense of the rest of society, then we must ask whether this is what is best for us all collectively. And if not, we must start to rethink the place of finance in our society. We need to ask, what is the finance sector good for, and reorient it to doing those things rather than continuing to allow it to distort our economy as it does today.